here is our video going over 6.5 factoring trinomials. So a trinomial is the standard form of our quadratic equation. So it is the ax squared plus bx plus c. And the method we are going to use to factor that is going to be factoring by grouping. So it's a four-step process. Step number one is to multiply a and c. So I'm going to multiply those two numbers. And step number two is going to be to set up your giant X. This right here is the giant X that I'm talking about. Whatever number you get for a times c, that is going to go on the top of your giant X. And your middle term b is going to go on the bottom of your giant X. You are going to find two numbers that multiply to the top and add to the bottom. Those two numbers are going to go in these two spaces for your giant X, and we're going to use that to split the middle of our quadratic and then factor by grouping. So it makes a lot more sense as I do this with an example. So let's do our first example. So letter A, x squared plus 16x plus 60. My first step is to multiply a and c. If there is no number in front of x, it is like having a 1 there. So I'm going to start by multiplying 1 and 60, because that's my a and my c. And that is what's going to go on top of my giant X. So 1 times 60 is 60. And b, my middle number, is what's going to go on the bottom. So I am trying to find two numbers that multiply to 60 and add to 16. So we need to think about different ways that you can multiply to get 60. You could do 6 times 10, 2 times 30, 15 times 4, and one of those sets is going to add to 16. So let me go ahead and write down what I said. I did 6 and 10, which is going to add to 16. So those are the two numbers that I'm going to put on the side of my giant X. And these two numbers, the 6 and the 16, the 6 and the 10, we are going to use to split the middle. So here's what I mean by split the middle. I'm going to rewrite my expression. So I have x squared plus, but instead of 16x, I'm going to write it as 6x plus 10x plus the 60. So these two terms, the 6 and the 10, coincide with the two numbers that I put on the side of my giant X's. From here, I am going to factor by grouping. So factoring by grouping, I'm going to put my first group together, my second group together, and I'm going to find the GCF of each group. So the GCF of my first group is just X. GCF of my second group is going to be 10. So for your GCF, I'm trying to find the largest number or expression that divides evenly into my group. And I'm going to make this a positive 10 since positive 10 goes into both of those. Now for factoring by grouping, I'm going to put the GCF in the front, and I need to figure out x squared divided by x, which is x, and then 6x divided by x is 6. So I have x plus 6 in my parentheses, plus my other GCF, which was 10. And then I'm going to divide my second group by 10, so 10x divided by 10 is x, plus 60 divided by 10 is 6. And with factoring by grouping, these two expressions should be exactly the same, which they are. So I can go ahead and finish off the factoring by grouping by setting up my double bubbles. One of them is going to be that x plus 6, and the other one is going to include the GCFs, x plus 10. And there is your final answer. All right, let's do another one. Again, I am going to start by multiplying a and c. So 2 times 3 is going to give me 6. And that's what I'm going to put on top of my giant X. And my b, my middle term, is what's going to go on the bottom of my giant X. Once again, I am trying to find two numbers that multiply to the top and add to the bottom. So I need to think what times what gives me 6. Well, I have 1 times 6. I also have 2 times 3. And one of these sets is going to add to that 5, which is the 2 and the 3. So those are the two numbers I'm going to put on the sides of my giant X, and then I am going to split the middle. So I'm going to rewrite my expression, 2x squared plus 2x plus 3x plus 3. And once again, this 2 and the 3 came from the numbers on the side of my giant X. I am going to factor by grouping. So the GCF of my first group is going to be 2x. GCF of my second group is a positive 3. For my first GCF, I can take out the 2x, and 2x squared divided by 2x is x. 2x divided by 2x is 1, and I'm going to divide my second group by 3. So 3x divided by 3 is x, plus 3 divided by 3 is 1. And final answer, x plus 1 times 2x plus 3. Now, these parentheses can be written in any order, so if you write your 2x plus 3 first, followed by the x plus 1, that is perfectly fine. So these two examples incorporated all positive numbers, so let's start to incorporate some negatives because that has a tendency to get a little tricky. So let's go to letter C. X squared minus 7x plus 10. Again, I don't have a number in front of my x squared, so my a is 1. I'm going to multiply a and c, which gives me 10. B is going to go on the bottom, which in this case is negative 7. And I need to figure out two numbers that multiply to 10 and add to negative 7. So the ways that we can multiply to 10 are 10 and 1. And 2 and 5, but keep in mind we need to multiply to a positive 10 and add to a negative 7. Now if this was a positive 7, 2 and 5 would work perfectly because 2 times 5 gives you that 10, but 2 plus 5 gives you a positive 7, not a negative 7, so I'm going to go ahead and make both of these negative. Negative 2 plus negative 5 gives me negative 7. And if I were to multiply these two negatives together, it would give me that positive 10. I'm going to go ahead and split the middle. So I have x squared minus 2x minus 5x plus 10. My negative 2 minus 5x came from the two sides of my giant X. Factor by grouping. Out of my first group, they have an x in common. Out of my second group, they do have a 5 in common, but because this middle term is negative, I'm actually going to factor out a negative 5. That way our factoring by grouping ends up working out correctly. So continuing the factoring by grouping, I have my GCF in the front. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 2x divided by x is negative 2. Minus 5, my other GCF. Negative 5x divided by negative 5 is x. Positive 10 divided by negative 5 is negative 2. And double bubbles, I have x minus 5 with x minus 2. You can always double check your answers by multiplying out the x minus 5 with the x minus 2, and that would give you the x squared minus 7x plus 10. All right, a couple more with the negatives. So 3x squared plus x minus 10. There is no number in front of my x, so that is having a 1 there. I'm going to go ahead and start by multiplying a and c. Set up my giant X. So 3 times negative 10 is negative 30. My b is 1 because that's my middle term. I want to find two numbers that multiply to 30 and add to 1. Multiply to negative 30 and add to 1. Okay, so how can I multiply to get 30? Well, I have 1 times 30, 2 times 15, 5 times 6, And I think that's it. Now, since I need to multiply to a negative 30, that means one of these values is going to have to be negative, because in order to multiply to get a negative, you need to multiply a positive number and a negative number. Now, since one of these numbers has to be negative, instead of thinking about which one is going to add to get 1, think about which one's going to subtract to get 1. So if I look at my pairs, I have 1 and 30. There's no way that I can subtract those numbers. That's going to give me 1. Same with 2 and 15. But for 5 and 6, if I were to subtract 6 minus 5, that is going to create a positive 1. So that ends up being my two numbers on the side of my giant X, positive 6 and negative 5. So I can go ahead and use that to split the middle. So I have 3x squared plus 6x minus 5x minus 10. From here, GCF of 3x squared and 6x, that's going to be 3x. Over here, they can both be divisible by 5, but again, since this is negative, I'm going to go ahead and use negative 5, and we factor by grouping. So out of my first group, when I pull out the 3x, that leaves me with x plus 2. Out of my second group, when I pull out the negative 5, that leaves me with x plus 2 as well. Keep in mind when you are pulling out the GCF, it's just like dividing. So negative 5x divided by negative 5 gives me x. Negative 10 divided by negative 5 gives me that 2. And towards my final answer, x plus 2 with the 3x minus 5. There we go. Now, a lot of times people really struggle with figuring out which number was negative. So going back to my giant X over here, I had 6 and negative 5. One thing that you can remember is the bigger number out of these two, the bigger number is always going to match the sign of your B. So in this case, my 1 is positive. So that means my bigger number is going to end up being positive. So just another little trick to help you figure out which value is going to be positive or negative. Your bigger number is always going to match the sign of your B. Okay, couple more. I think I have 2 more, just 2 more. Okay. Multiply A and C. 1 and 18. 1 times 18 is 18. B is negative 9. So I need to find two numbers that multiply to a positive 18 and add to a negative 9. So ways to get 18, I have 1 and 18, 2 and 9, 3 and 6. And if that 9 was a positive 9, 3 and 6 would work out perfectly. But since it needs to multiply to get a positive 18 and add to a negative 9, I'm going to go ahead and make both of those values negative. That way, when I multiply a negative and a negative, it gives me that positive 18. And we're going to split the middle. So I have x squared minus 3x minus 6x plus 18. GCF of my first group is x. GCF of my second group is going to be 6, but again, that sucker's negative, so let's go ahead and make that a negative 6. I'm going to go ahead and factor out x from my first group. That leaves me with x minus 3. Going to factor out a negative 6 from my second group. Leaves me with x minus 3. Final answer, x minus 3 with your x minus 6. And last example. Oh, this one's a good one because I can re-explain my little trick with the positives and negatives. So I'm going to multiply A and C. So 2 times negative 1 is negative 2. my b is -1. So I need to find two numbers that multiply to -2 and add to 1. Well, the only way you can multiply to get 2 is 2 and 1. So these numbers have to be 2 and 1. And my little trick that I was trying to explain earlier is that my bigger number is always going to match the sign of the b, which is on the bottom of my x. So the b is a -1, so my bigger number is going to have to be negative. You can also double check this because -2 plus 1 is going to give you that -1 on the bottom of your giant X. And we split the middle. 2x squared minus 2x plus 1x minus 1. First group has a 2x in common. Second group, the only thing that they have in common is a 1. So I'm going to do plus 1. And we factor by grouping. So out of my first group, when I take out a 2x, that leaves me with x minus 1. Out of my second group, I can take out the 1, so I'm dividing by 1, leaves me with x minus 1. And final answer in our double bubbles, 2x plus 1 and x minus 1. Alright, so that concludes this video going over factoring trinomials by splitting the middle and then factoring by grouping.